The nail was the first insult. A 3-inch galvanized spike, driven right through the weathered wood of my barn door. It held a single piece of paper, an official-looking letterhead flapping in the slight breeze. The sound it must have made, that sharp tear of metal through 100-year-old timber, felt personal. I'd spent my life as an environmental consultant, reading the land, understanding how water flows and where foundations crack. I could tell you the story of a hillside from the lean of its trees. But this was a different kind of violation. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth, a scent I usually loved. Today it was tainted, overlaid with the cloying, cheap perfume I knew belonged to Karen. She was standing there, just at the edge of my property line, arms crossed over her chest, a self-satisfied smirk on her face. Beside her, 2 beefy guys in safe spray pest control uniforms stood like gargoyles. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at my barn, as if measuring it for demolition. This is the kind of story you hear about on channels like Karenology, you know? The kind you watch and think, that could never happen to me. Well, it was happening. I pulled the nail out. It left a jagged hole. The letter was from the Homeowners Association. It said my 3 barn cats, Tom, Jerry, and the little calico, Patches, were now classified as vermin, pests. I had 48 hours to remove them, or face a fine of $500 per day. "The clock is ticking, Mr. Hayes," Karen called out, her voice dripping with fake concern. I have a nervous habit. I carry this old fluorescent marker in my pocket. It was a gift from my old mentor, a guy who taught me how to read contamination sites. The ink is almost dry now, but I click it. Click, click, click. It's the sound of me thinking. Right then, it was the only thing keeping me from walking over there and saying something I'd regret. I just folded the paper, stuck it in my pocket, and turned my back on her. I could feel her eyes on me, expecting a reaction. I gave her nothing but the sight of me walking back to my house. Let her wonder. But inside, my blood was boiling. Those cats weren't just cats. They were the silent guardians of this place. They'd been here longer than half the houses in this subdivision, keeping the real pests, the rats from the nearby creek, at bay. Funny thing is, I knew arguing was pointless, but I had to try. You ever feel that? That you have to walk into the lion's den, even when you know you're on the menu? The next morning, I walked into the Homeowners Association office. It smelled of stale coffee and air freshener, that sterile scent of petty bureaucracy. Karen was sitting behind her desk like a queen on a throne made of particle board. The rest of the board, 3 neighbors I'd known for years, sat at a long table, avoiding my eyes. That's when you know you've already lost. "Alex," Karen started, her voice now smooth as oil. "We're all neighbors here. We just want what's best for the community." "What's best is not finding me for cats that solve a rat problem you've ignored for years," I said, keeping my voice level. She sighed, a dramatic put-upon sound. "We've had complaints." She pushed a folder across the desk. I opened it. Inside were a dozen photos, my calico, Patches, supposedly on someone's pristine porch furniture. Tom, a big ginger tomcat, apparently digging up prize-winning petunias. The pictures were clumsy fakes, badly photoshopped, with shadows all wrong. "This is garbage, Karen. You know it." She just smiled that icy smile. "The board has already reviewed the evidence. We find the complaints valid." She didn't even look at them. They just nodded like bobbleheads. One of them, a guy named Bill who I'd helped jumpstart his car last winter, finally looked up. His face was a mask of apology and helplessness. "The vote is to uphold the notice," Karen declared, a gavel sound in her voice, even without a gavel. "The fines begin tomorrow at noon, $500. The economic clock was officially ticking. I felt the clicker in my pocket. Click, click. I looked at the faces around the table, a gallery of cowards led by a tyrant. This wasn't about cats. This was about power. She was making an example out of me. I stood up, pushing the chair back. The sound scraped loudly in the quiet room. I didn't say another word. There was nothing to say. I walked out of that sterile, cold office and into the warm morning sun, but I felt a chill run right through me. The first blow had been struck, and it wasn't with a fist. It was with a pen, a rule book, and a room full of people too scared to do the right thing. And as I walked away, I knew this was just the beginning. She wanted a war, and I was starting to think I was in the mood to give her one. She wanted a war, What she didn't know was that I had spent 20 years navigating corporate minefields and environmental disasters. I'd learned one thing: you don't fight the enemy on their terms, you change the battlefield. That weekend, Karen hosted one of her community-building barbecues. It was less about community and more about her holding court. The air was thick with the smell of cheap charcoal and simmering resentment. I went, not because I wanted a hot dog, but because I knew she'd use my absence against me. It was a tactical decision, a bad one, it turned out. I was barely there 10 minutes before she gathered a crowd near the clubhouse. With a practiced look of concern, she put her hand on the shoulder of another neighbor, a young mom whose kid had allergies. "It's for the safety of children like little Timmy," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We can't have feral, unvaccinated animals roaming our streets." Feral, the word hit me like a stone. My cats were born in that barn, their mother a stray I'd taken in years ago. They were vaccinated, fixed, and healthier than most of the pampered poodles in the neighborhood. "They're not feral, Karen," I said, my voice low. She turned to me, her eyes wide with fake innocence. "Alex, I'm so glad you came. We were just discussing the importance of following community guidelines for everyone's well-being." The circle of neighbors tightened. I was no longer a guest. I was on trial. The mom, fueled by Karen's performance, stepped forward. "My Timmy can't even play in his own yard. What if one of your cats scratches him?" And that's when I made my mistake. The anger I'd been bottling up finally blew. "Your kid is more likely to get sick from the rats swarming the clubhouse than from my cats," I snapped. My voice was too loud, too raw. "They're the only thing keeping the rat population down, a problem this board has done nothing about." Silence, the kind of dead, heavy silence that follows a car crash. I looked around. I saw it in their faces: pity, annoyance, a little bit of fear. In their eyes, I wasn't a concerned neighbor. I was an unhinged man yelling about rats. I was the problem. Karen's smile was triumphant. It was a perfect takedown. I had walked right into her trap. Have you ever had a moment like that, where you say the absolute truth, but the way you say it makes you the liar? I turned and walked away, the sound of my own heartbeat drumming in my ears. The barbecue chatter slowly resumed behind me, now laced with whispers. I felt like a ghost in my own neighborhood. As I reached the edge of the park, a soft voice called my name. "Mr. Hayes." It was Margaret, a retired librarian who lived 2 doors down. She was a quiet woman in her 70s, mostly kept to herself. She held out a small brown paper bag. I bought the wrong kind. My Percy is so picky." I looked inside. It was a bag of the expensive cat food my cats loved. My throat felt tight. "Margaret, thank you." She just gave me a small, sad smile. "They're good cats," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Then she looked toward the creek that ran behind our properties. "Funny thing," she added, almost to herself. "My prize-winning roses, the ones near the water, they've started to wither, ever since that safe spray company started coming around." She patted my arm and walked away before I could respond. Her words hung in the air. Roses don't just wither for no reason. Not Margaret's roses. She babied them more than most people baby their kids. I walked past my house, straight to the back of my property where it sloped down to the creek. I knelt by the bank where her garden ended. The smell of decay was faint, but it was there, under the scent of damp earth. And then I saw it, a faint shimmering film on the surface of the water, swirling in the slow-moving current. It wasn't natural. It was an oily, chemical sheen that caught the afternoon light in a rainbow of wrongness. I stood there for a long time, the sounds of the barbecue fading into the distance. The fight wasn't about my cats anymore. It was about dying roses, and it was about whatever poison was being bled into our water. The oily sheen on the water was a question mark. It was the kind of detail that snags in your brain and refuses to let go. I spent my career tracing invisible poisons through soil and water, and my instincts were screaming. I took a sample in a clean glass jar, sealing it tight. For the next 2 days, I was a ghost. I avoided the neighborhood chat groups, ignored the smug looks from Karen as she drove past my house, and focused on 2 things: the water sample and my cats. I sent a portion of the sample to a buddy of mine who runs a private lab. It cost me, but it was a cost I was willing to pay. The fine from the Homeowners Association was now up to $1,000, a silent daily reminder of Karen's power. But that was just noise. The real signal was in that jar. Let me tell you something. When you feel like you're cornered, sometimes the only thing to do is to go quiet and watch. I spent hours just observing. I saw the safe spray truck make its rounds. They never seemed to spray anything. They'd park behind the clubhouse for an hour, then drive off. It was strange. The evening before my 48-hour deadline was up, I was sitting on my porch watching the sun dip below the trees. The air was cool, carrying the scent of cut grass. And then, a sound. A quiet snip. I looked toward the back of my property, toward the old wire fence that separated my yard from the woods. I saw a flicker of movement, 2 figures dressed in dark clothes. It was the same 2 guys from Safe Spray. One of them was holding bolt cutters. My heart hammered against my ribs. I grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight I keep by the door and sprinted across the yard, my boots sinking into the soft turf. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing on my property?" They froze like deer in headlights, caught in the bright beam of my flashlight. For a second, nobody moved. Then, one of them dropped the cutters and they both bolted, crashing through the underbrush and disappearing into the darkness. I ran to the fence. There was a clean, neat cut right through the wire. And then the silence hit me. The familiar soft rustling from the barn was gone. I called their names. "Tom, Jerry, Patches." Nothing. I swept the flashlight beam across the barn's entrance. The food bowls were full. The water was fresh. But the barn was empty. My cats were gone. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't about scaring them off. This was a professional job. They hadn't just opened a gate. They'd cut a hole, herded them out, and taken them. What would you do in that moment? The rage I felt was a physical thing, a hot pressure behind my eyes. But I knew that's what they wanted. They wanted me to explode, to call the cops, to make a scene. It would just be my word against theirs, the word of the crazy cat man. Instead, I walked back to the house, my movements stiff. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the neighborhood app, a new post from Karen. "Great news, everyone," it read. "The pest problem has been professionally and humanely resolved. We can all breathe a little easier tonight." It was accompanied by a stock photo of a smiling family. The hypocrisy was breathtaking, humane. They'd trespassed and stolen my animals in the middle of the night. At that moment, my work email pinged, and again, and again. I opened my laptop. My professional ratings page, where clients left reviews, was being flooded. 1-star reviews, all posted within the last 10 minutes. Unreliable, missed deadlines, doesn't respect property. They were all anonymous, all fake, but they were devastating. My business, my livelihood, was built on reputation. She wasn't just coming for my home. She was coming for my ability to make a living. The fines had now reached $1,500. 2 potential contracts, worth at least $10,000, were suddenly in jeopardy because of these fake reviews. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the screen lighting up the dark room. I felt hollowed out. She had won. She had taken my allies, turned my neighbors against me, and now she was methodically destroying my life. I had no proof, no witnesses, just a hole in my fence and a deep burning anger. And somewhere out there, my cats were alone. Or worse. The next morning, the world felt gray. The quiet of the barn was a constant aching reminder of what I'd lost. I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at a stack of bills and the glowing screen of my laptop with its toxic 1-star reviews, when a memory surfaced. It was my old neighbor Sal, a retired plumber with hands like leather and a voice like gravel. He'd helped me fix a burst pipe a few years back. As he was leaving, he'd tapped the main water line coming into the house and said, "Go with the flow, kid, but always know where the water comes from." It was just an old-timer's saying, but right then, it felt like a map. Go with the flow. My eyes drifted to the jar of creek water still sitting on my counter. The lab results from my friend were due any time. The whole mess had started with the cats, but Margaret's dying roses and that oily sheen. That was the loose thread. You pull on a thread like that, and sometimes a whole damn sweater unravels. I decided to take a walk, not around the neighborhood, but along the creek. I started at my property line and worked my way upstream, my boots squelching in the mud. About a quarter-mile up, the creek passed behind the community clubhouse. And that's when the smell hit me. Not the smell of decay from the water, but the foul, greasy stench of garbage and rats. The back of the clubhouse was a disaster. Overflowing dumpsters, bags of trash torn open. And the place was crawling. Not just a few rats, but dozens. They scurried in the shadows, their beady eyes glinting. It was a full-blown infestation, far worse than I'd ever imagined. The Homeowners Association was paying a pest control company that wasn't controlling anything. In fact, it looked like the problem was getting worse. It didn't make sense. Unless the goal wasn't to solve the problem. What if the goal was the problem itself? My phone buzzed. It was a text from my friend at the lab. "You're not going to believe this. The water sample is clean. Almost too clean." I called him immediately. "What do you mean, too clean?" "I mean, there's almost no organic matter, no bacteria, no algae, nothing you'd expect to find in a natural creek. But there are traces of two things, a high-end surfactant, a sort of industrial soap, and a specific type of commercial-grade herbicide, the kind they use on golf courses." I hung up, my mind racing. Herbicide, surfactant, a clean creek. It was all backward. Then Sal's words echoed in my head again. "Know where the water comes from." The creek flowed through our neighborhood, but it started somewhere else. I pulled up a satellite map on my phone. The creek originated about 2 miles north, flowing out of an exclusive new golf course community, the one I'd heard Karen's husband, a prominent developer, was building. Suddenly, the pieces started to click into place, forming a dark and ugly picture. What if they weren't just neglecting the rat problem? What if they were feeding it, keeping the infestation going to justify the safe spray contract? And the cats? The cats weren't a nuisance. They were a threat. They were free pest control, and they were messing up the business model. But the water, that was the part I couldn't figure out. Why would someone be dumping golf course chemicals into our creek? It felt like a separate issue, a confusing secondary plot. I was so lost in thought that I almost missed her. A young woman in a county parks uniform was further down the creek, taking notes on a clipboard. She looked up as I approached, her expression wary. "Everything all right here?" she asked. "Just taking a walk," I said. "You with the county?" "Water quality inspection," she said, her eyes scanning the creek. "We had an anonymous tip about illegal dumping." She pointed with her pen. "Right up there. See that drainage pipe? It's not on any of the county maps. Looks new." I followed her gaze. Tucked away under a thicket of overgrown bushes was a large PVC pipe, slick with moisture, jutting out from the embankment. It was aimed directly at the creek, an unregistered illegal outflow, a direct line from the golf course. I looked from the pipe to the clubhouse, from the clubhouse to the memory of Margaret's dying roses. Two separate problems. Or were they? A chilling thought began to form in my mind. What if this was all connected? What if the rats were just a distraction, and the real prize was the water itself? And that's when I felt it again, that clicker in my pocket. But this time, I wasn't just thinking. I was planning. I finally had my own thread to pull. Back home, the place felt too quiet. The barn doors swung in the wind, and I almost expected Tom's hefty paw to poke out from the straw, but nothing moved. My phone buzzed again, and this one was not a lab result. It was another fine notice, $1,500 now owed, but I barely looked at it. Something shifted in me. I grabbed my old fluorescent marker and a sample vial, set out for the drainage pipe. The markers of the day were everywhere, sunlight bouncing off slick plastic, air sharp from last night's rain. I crouched down, clicked the marker twice, an old ritual. Its faded tip still glowed under the light. I poured a tiny bit of water onto the marker cap. It didn't react, not a speck of color. That confirmed it. This was no ordinary runoff. Did you ever stand at the edge of your own defeat and just ask, why me? I followed the creek as it wound toward the far boundary of our neighborhood. At the edge, the terrain changed. Muddy banks sloped to a cluster of maintenance sheds. That's where I found 2 empty herbicide canisters, dumped right beside the outflow. There was a label, partially torn, for commercial use only. It matched what my buddy found in the lab. My jaw clenched. That proved the chemicals weren't coming from any home gardener. It was then Sal appeared, his boots thumping on loose stone. "Going fishing or hunting rats?" he asked. Then his eyes followed mine to the pipe and canisters. "If you want to find what's clogging the creek, you better try the irrigation junction behind the construction site," he told me. It was typical Sal, short, abrupt, always pointing you further down the rabbit hole. So I walked, ticking off every step with my marker in my fist. By the time I reached the site, the sun was low and the construction fence cast long shadows over piles of fresh turf. On the other side, a couple of workers were pulling hoses from a bank into the creek. A whiff of that cheap gas smell filled the air, and a sound of water rushing where none should be. I marched up, ignoring the startled look from one guy. "What's being pumped out?" I demanded. He shrugged, checking behind his back. "It's routine maintenance, man. Routine for a golf course, not for a residential creek." He tried to walk away, but Sal, right behind me, blocked his path. "My roses are dying, so's his barn. You want to explain?" The kid paled. "Look, we're just told to flush the drainage at night. They said it's legal." "Legal doesn't mean harmless," I said. Sal patted my shoulder. "Let's go. You've got enough." When we reached my property, the place was darker, but something was off. My neighbor Margaret stepped from behind my porch, her arms full of empty seed packets. "They never grew right, not since last spring," she whispered, her voice breaking. I realized how deep the damage went, how Karen's control stretched past fines and rumors right into the earth. In that moment, my marker clicked empty. The final snap echoed in the dark quiet. I was out. Out of ink, patience, and perhaps options. But that's when I really started thinking clearly. That night, an email came. "Your account flagged for non-compliance. Service suspended pending investigation." It was my professional service, gone until I could clear my name. I stared at the screen, feeling the edges of my resolve curl inward. The war Karen started wasn't about pests. It was about erasing me, one click, one rumor, one chemical at a time. Funny thing is, pain can focus you more than any plan. I grabbed what was left of my supplies and wrote out a checklist. Tomorrow was the Homeowners Association's big meeting, the kind you only get invited to when you're the agenda's main course. I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about all the small betrayals, about Sal and Margaret, forced into silence by poison and red tape, about my cats, wherever they were. Sometimes, to win, you have to lose something first. The only question left was, what was it going to cost me next? And as the sun broke through, streaking the sky orange, I saw her. Karen stepping outside, phone in one hand, smirk on her face. She raised the screen, snapped a picture of my empty barn, undoubtedly for another round of evidence. This time, her finger hovered longer on the button, like she wanted the shot to last. You ever watch someone build your last mistake right into their next victory? That's the snapshot that stuck with me. The morning of the Homeowners Association meeting was cold and gray, matching my mood. The digital clock on my stove read 7:00 a.m. The meeting was at 10, 3 hours to turn the tide or drown. My professional reputation was in tatters, my cats were gone, and I was facing thousands in fines. I felt like a man standing on a trap door, waiting for the lever to be pulled. But then, something happened. As I was staring out the window, my neighbor Sal's words echoed in my head. Go with the flow, but always know where the water comes from. It was a plumber's wisdom, but it was more than that. It was a strategy. I had been so focused on the poison in the water that I'd missed the bigger picture, the water itself. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the county water usage records, which are public if you know where to look. I cross-referenced the dates of the safe spray visits with the water meter readings for our neighborhood. There was no correlation, but then I did something different. I pulled up the records for the new golf course development, and there it was, a huge glaring anomaly. Their water consumption was laughably low for a new golf course. They were supposed to be watering acres of new sod, but their usage was less than a handful of suburban homes. It was impossible, unless they weren't using county water, unless they were getting it from somewhere else, for free. The illegal PVC pipe. The herbicide runoff wasn't the point, it was a byproduct. They weren't just dumping their wastewater into our creek, they were stealing our creek's water, rerouting it to fill their ponds and irrigate their greens. The creek's water level had been dropping for months, so gradually no one noticed. The herbicides were just the evidence of their theft. And the rats? The rats were the perfect distraction, a manufactured crisis. Karen had created a problem, the rats, and then hired her husband's cronies, Safe Spray, to solve it, all while the real crime was happening silently, just a few hundred yards away. My cats were never the target. They were collateral damage because they were too good at their job. They were messing up the rat crisis that kept the whole scheme funded. My hands started shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I had it, the whole crooked, rotten puzzle, but facts on a screen weren't enough. I needed to show them. I needed a live demonstration. I made 2 calls. The first was to Leo, a tech-savvy teenager down the street who was always flying his high-end drone. I offered him $100 to be my eye in the sky for an hour. He agreed instantly. The second call was to my insurance agent. I didn't tell him the whole story. I just asked a simple hypothetical question. "Hey, John," I said, my voice calm. "Quick question. If a homeowners association was found to be knowingly negligent in maintaining a shared natural resource, like a creek, leading to property damage and potential health risks, how would that affect our homeowner's insurance?" There was a pause. I could hear him typing. "Alex," he said slowly, "that's not hypothetical, is it? Negligence like that, especially if it involves unpermitted water diversion, that could be grounds for a carrier to drop the entire community. Premiums would skyrocket, mortgages could be called in. It would be catastrophic." Catastrophic. I love the sound of that word. The final piece of my plan was low-tech. A 5-gallon bucket and a large container of industrial-grade, non-toxic, bright red food dye, the kind they use for leak detection. As I walked to the community clubhouse for the meeting, I felt a strange sense of calm. The weight of the past week was still there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. It was fuel. Karen was expecting a broken man to show up and beg for mercy. She was about to meet someone else entirely. She had made this fight about rules. Fine, let's talk about rules. I had a few of my own she was about to learn. I walked into that room not just to defend myself, but to dismantle her entire world. And I was going to do it in front of everyone. The community clubhouse was packed. It felt less like a meeting and more like a public execution, with me as the guest of honor. Karen stood at a lectern at the front, beaming. She was in her element. She recounted my violations, the danger my vermin posed, and the reluctant but necessary fines, which she announced had now reached a grand total of $5,000. She proposed a final motion to place a lien on my property. The room was a sea of grim, compliant faces. I had to give it to her. She was a master conductor of fear. As she asked for a second to her motion, I stood up. "Before you vote," I said, my voice cutting through the stuffy air, "I have a presentation of my own." A murmur went through the crowd. Karen's smile tightened. "This is not on the agenda, Alex." "Make room for it," I said. I walked to the front and plugged my laptop into the projector. An aerial map of our neighborhood flickered onto the screen. "We have a rat problem," I began, my voice calm and steady. "And we have a water problem. Everyone thinks they're separate. They're not." I clicked a button. The image on the screen switched to a live feed. It was from Leo's drone, hovering high above the creek. "A few minutes ago," I announced, "I poured a gallon of concentrated red food dye into the creek at the edge of my property. Let's watch where it goes, shall we?" You could have heard a pin drop. Every eye was glued to the screen. They watched as a vibrant red plume traveled down the clear water. It flowed past the clubhouse, a bright red artery. Then, just as it reached the edge of the development, the red plume swerved sharply and vanished. It was sucked into the illegal PVC pipe. I clicked again, showing them the satellite map. "That pipe doesn't lead to a county sewer. It leads directly here." I brought up an image of the golf course, its ponds a perfect artificial blue. "They've been stealing our water for months. The Safe Spray Company, their job wasn't to get rid of rats. Their job was to make sure the rat problem was just bad enough to keep everyone distracted." A wave of shock rippled through the room. People were looking at each other, then at Karen, whose face had gone pale. "This is absurd," she stammered. "You have no proof." "Oh, but I do," I said. I pulled out my phone and dialed my insurance agent, putting him on speaker. "John, Alex Hayes, could you repeat what you told me earlier? What happens if a homeowners association is found to be willfully negligent in managing a shared water resource, leading to contamination and unpermitted diversion?" John's professional, dispassionate voice filled the room. "As I said, Alex, that would be a material breach. Most carriers would cancel the policies for the entire development. It would be financially catastrophic. Chaos. That's the only word for it. People were yelling, shouting questions at Karen, pulling out their phones. The lien on my property was forgotten. Now they were facing their own financial ruin. A man in a sharp suit I'd never seen before pushed his way through the crowd to me. "Mr. Hayes," he hissed, "my client is prepared to offer you a very generous sum to sign a non-disclosure agreement. We can make all of this go away." I looked past him, into the crowd. I saw Margaret. She was standing, her back straight, a small, fierce smile on her face. I thought about my cats. I thought about the nail in my barn door. This was my ethical fork in the road. The easy money or the right thing. Was it even a choice? "Tell your client," I said, my voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "that my price is this. The Homeowners Association will terminate its contract with Safe Spray and the developer's geologists immediately. Karen will resign from the board, effective now, and you will create a multi-million-dollar fund to repair the environmental damage and compensate homeowners. Finally, you will hire a new, independent auditor to oversee this community's water resources, and that auditor will be me." I paused, letting it sink in. "Oh, and one more thing." I looked directly at Karen. "You're going to tell me where my cats are. I had them microchipped with GPS trackers. I know the exact address of the no-kill shelter you dropped them at 60 miles from here. I want them back, today." I picked up my old, empty fluorescent marker from the lectern, walked over to a trash can, and dropped it in. The soft clatter was the loudest sound in the room. I didn't need it anymore. Weeks later, things are different. The creek is running full again. My cats are back, sleeping in the sun-drenched barn. Karen's house is on the market. I won, but victory has a price. When I walk through the neighborhood now, people don't see Alex, the quiet consultant. They see the guy who took down the queen. They're friendly, but there's a distance. A respect that feels a lot like fear. I'm no longer just one of them. I'm the guardian of the water, the man who holds the rules. It's a lonely job, but as I sit on my porch with Patches purring on my lap, I can't say it's not worth it. Some things are.